When I first met Emma, I thought she was the one. We were both broke, working part-time jobs, sharing cheap dinners, and dreaming about a better life. She used to say, "One day we'll look back and laugh at this struggle." I believed her. I thought love was enough to survive anything. But as time passed, something changed. The laughter faded, replaced by long silences and her constant complaints about money. "I'm tired of living like this," she said one night. "You talk big, but you never actually make things happen." It hurt because she wasn't wrong. I was trying, but nothing seemed to work. My startup ideas failed, my savings dried up, and I was barely holding on. Still, I believed that every failure was a lesson. She, on the other hand, started losing faith. One evening, I came home with excitement. I had just pitched my app idea to a small investor, and they seemed interested. But before I could tell her, she said the words that broke me. "You'll never be rich, Michael. You don't have what it takes." She didn't yell, she said it quietly, almost like she was tired of pretending. Then she packed a small bag and left. No fight, no tears. Just silence and footsteps fading away. I sat on the floor that night, staring at the door she just walked out of. I wasn't angry. I was numb. All the years, the dreams, the promises, gone in seconds. But as I sat there, something inside me clicked. If love couldn't keep her, maybe success could bring me peace. I made myself a promise that night. I would become everything she said I couldn't. Not to get her back, but to prove that she was wrong. That was the night I stopped chasing people and started chasing purpose. The first few weeks after she left were the hardest. The silence in my apartment was suffocating. Every corner still smelled like her perfume. Every mug in the kitchen reminded me of the mornings we shared. I tried to distract myself by working, but the pain crept into everything I did. Sleep became rare, food tasteless, and time slow. But something shifted inside me. The anger that I refused to show that night began to turn into fuel. I started reading about successful people who had lost everything before making it big. Men who had been laughed at, rejected, and told they'd never amount to anything. I saw pieces of myself in their stories. One day, I walked into a small co-working space downtown with nothing but an old laptop, a notebook full of ideas, and a quiet fire inside me. My app idea had failed before, but I knew where I went wrong. I focused on impressing investors, not solving problems. This time, I decided to build something that mattered. I spent days coding, nights studying, and weekends delivering food just to pay rent. People at the co-working space used to joke that I lived there, and maybe I did. I had no social life, no distractions, just a dream that refused to die. Slowly, the app began to take shape. It was a simple concept. A platform that connected small freelancers with startups needing quick jobs done. I called it Quick Link. The idea wasn't revolutionary, but it solved a real problem. The first few users trickled in. Then dozens. Then hundreds. I remember the day I earned my first $100 through it. It felt like a million. For the first time in years, I felt alive again. But success didn't come overnight. There were bugs, failed updates, angry users, and nights when I doubted myself all over again. Yet this time I refused to quit. Every no I heard only echoed her words, "You'll never be rich." And every time I heard that voice in my head, I worked harder. Because deep down, I knew, one day those words would come back to haunt her. Months turned into a year and life started changing, slowly but surely. My app, QuickLink, grew from a side project into a real business. Freelancers began recommending it to one another, and small companies started relying on it for quick, affordable work. I hired my first employee, an intern who believed in the idea as much as I did. We worked out of that same cramped co-working space, drinking bad coffee and dreaming of something bigger. Money started trickling in. It wasn't much, but it was enough to pay the bills without delivery shifts. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. Every notification from a new user felt like a small victory, a quiet reminder that I was on the right path. But with every milestone, I couldn't help thinking of Emma. Not out of love anymore, but because her words had built a wall in my mind. "You'll never be rich." It became the echo that pushed me through sleepless nights. I wanted to silence it. Completely. By the end of the second year, we had investors interested. A small firm wanted to buy a 30% share in QuickLink. I remember sitting across from them in that meeting room, pretending to be calm while my heart raced. When they offered me my first major investment deal, I didn't celebrate. I just smiled quietly. It wasn't the end, it was the beginning. With that funding, I hired more developers, rented a small office, and launched a marketing campaign. The app exploded. Within months, we had thousands of users. I was running on coffee, adrenaline, and a stubborn fire that refused to die. Then one morning, as I scrolled through emails, something caught my eye. A client registration from a company I recognized. It was Hendrix Media, one of the largest creative agencies in the city. I froze for a second. That was the company Emma used to dream about working for. A strange thought crossed my mind. Was she still there? I couldn't get the thought out of my head. What if she's still there? It had been 3 years since that night, since her words had cut through me like a knife. I didn't even know if she remembered me or if she had moved on with someone else. But when I saw the company name on that email, something inside me stirred. Not anger, not pain, but a deep, quiet curiosity. I clicked the email again and read the sender's name carefully. Emma.h@hendrixmedia.com. My stomach tightened. It was her. For a moment I didn't move. I just stared at the screen. 3 years of silence, of rebuilding, of convincing myself I didn't care, and suddenly there she was right in front of me without even knowing it. The message was short and professional. She was contacting us for a collaboration proposal between Hendrix Media and Quicklink. She signed it, "Best regards, Emma Harper." No emotion, no memory. Just business. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. Life has a strange sense of timing. 3 years ago, I couldn't afford to buy her dinner. Now, her company wanted to partner with mine. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I read that email a dozen times, wondering if she had any idea who she was writing to. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I was just another name on her long list of corporate contacts. But that was fine. Because I already knew, I wasn't going to reply as, "Michael, the guy you left." I was going to reply as, "Michael, the founder and CEO of Quicklink." I drafted my reply carefully, polite, professional, but firm. "Dear Ms. Harper, thank you for reaching out. We'd be happy to discuss a potential collaboration. Let's schedule a meeting next week at our office." I paused before hitting send, my finger hovering over the mouse. Then I smiled slightly, not out of bitterness but satisfaction. The universe doesn't forget. Sometimes it just takes its time to deliver. And next week, it was finally going to deliver mine. The morning of the meeting felt different. I had attended hundreds of meetings before, but this one carried a quiet electricity in the air, the kind that made your heart thump without a reason. I arrived early, straightened my tie, and made sure everything in the office looked perfect. It wasn't about showing off, it was about control. About rewriting a story that once ended with me broken. My assistant came in to let me know the Hendrix Media team had arrived. I took a slow breath before walking out to the conference room. As I stepped in, time seemed to slow down. She was there. Emma looked almost exactly the same, maybe even more polished. Her hair was tied neatly, her confidence written all over her face. She was talking to her colleague, unaware I had entered. I stood quietly for a second watching her, not with hate, not even with nostalgia, just a strange, distant calm. When she finally turned and saw me, I watched her expression freeze. Her words stopped mid-sentence. I smiled politely and extended my hand. "Emma, it's been a while." She blinked, struggling to find her voice. "Michael." "In the flesh," I said, still smiling. "Please have a seat." The rest of the team looked confused, sensing something beneath the surface but not daring to ask. We all sat down, and I led the meeting as if nothing unusual was happening. I spoke with ease, explaining our platform, our numbers, our growth, everything she once believed I'd never achieve. I noticed how quiet she was, how her eyes darted between me and the presentation, almost as if trying to connect the man she'd left with the man sitting before her now. By the time the meeting ended, I could tell she was barely holding her composure. As her team got up to leave, she stayed behind, pretending to check her phone. When the room cleared, I looked at her and said softly, "You once said I'd never be rich. Do you still believe that?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me speechless. I smiled faintly. I guess life had other plans. She stood there for a few seconds, frozen, as if she couldn't process what was happening. I could see the conflict in her eyes, pride fighting shock, regret mixing with disbelief. Finally, she forced a small, awkward smile. "You've done well for yourself," she said, her voice soft, almost cautious. "Thank you," I replied evenly. It took time, but I got there. There was silence. The kind that fills a room with everything words can't. She looked around, trying to say something casual, but every detail, the office, the logo on the wall, the people greeting me respectfully as they passed, reminded her who I had become. "I didn't know this was your company," she finally said. "I'm sure you didn't," I said, leaning back slightly. "But I knew it was yours when your email came through." Her expression shifted, a flicker of embarrassment. "I didn't mean what I said back then, Michael. I was angry and lost." I nodded slowly. We all were. but some of us found our way. She lowered her gaze, fumbling with her purse strap. You must hate me. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who once walked out on me wasn't the villain of my story anymore. She was just a chapter, one that ended exactly how it needed to. I don't hate you, Emma, I said calmly. If you hadn't said what you did, maybe I'd still be chasing comfort instead of ambition. So in a way, I should thank you. She looked up, eyes glistening slightly. You mean that? I do. I smiled faintly. You pushed me to become who I was meant to be. For a second she looked like she wanted to say something more, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain. But then she simply nodded, whispered, I'm happy for you, and walked away. I watched her leave, the same way she had 3 years ago, only this time I didn't feel broken. I felt free. And deep down I knew, my story with her wasn't over just yet. Days passed after that meeting, but her face lingered in my thoughts more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't love, that had died a long time ago. It was curiosity. A strange sense of unfinished business. Seeing her again after all those years didn't reopen old wounds, it revealed how completely they'd healed. Still, something told me this encounter wasn't the end. A few days later, my assistant walked in and said, Michael, there's someone here to see you. I looked up from my desk. Who? She hesitated. Emma Harper. I exhaled slowly and nodded. Send her in. She walked in looking more composed this time. No team, no colleagues, just her. She smiled politely, but her eyes gave away a mix of nerves and something deeper, maybe regret. I hope I'm not disturbing you, she said softly. Not at all. Have a seat, I replied. For a moment she just sat there quietly, looking around the office as if absorbing every detail. It's strange, she said. Being here again, talking to you like this. Yeah, I said. Life has a sense of humor. She smiled faintly. It really does. Then she hesitated. I came to apologize, Michael. Not for what I said, but for how I made you feel. I shouldn't have given up on you. You were trying, I just couldn't see it. I didn't say anything right away. She looked genuinely remorseful, and for the first time, it wasn't guilt that filled the space between us. It was understanding. Maybe you were right to leave, I finally said. If you hadn't, I'd never have had the reason to change. She shook her head. No. You changed because you had it in you all along. I just didn't stay long enough to see it. Her voice broke slightly at the end. For a moment, the strong, confident woman in front of me looked like the same girl I once knew, fragile and human. Emma, I said quietly, we both became who we needed to be. And that was the truth neither of us could deny. She nodded slowly, her eyes drifting toward the window as if she were searching for the right words. You know, I used to imagine you'd hate me forever, she said. But you're calm. Too calm. I smiled faintly. That's what success does. It quiets the noise. She gave a soft, thoughtful laugh. You really changed. I had to, I replied. When everything falls apart, you either break or you rebuild stronger. She looked at me for a long moment, the silence between us heavier than before. Then she said, Do you ever think about us? About what we could have been? The question caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting her to go there. I leaned back slightly, studying her expression. It wasn't manipulative or nostalgic, just honest. Sometimes, I admitted. Not because I miss it, but because I've learned from it. You were part of my story, Emma, the painful chapter that taught me to write better ones. Her lips curved into a sad smile. You always had a way with words. And you always underestimated them, I said gently. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. Touché. Then her tone softened again. You know, I'm happy you made it, Michael. Really. You deserve it. Thank you, I said sincerely. That means more than you think. She stood up slowly, smoothing her jacket. Anyway, I should go. I have another meeting across town. I nodded, rising with her. Of course. But before she turned to leave, she hesitated. Michael, she said softly, if life had gone differently, do you think we could have worked out? I paused, the question hanging in the air. I thought about everything, the late nights, the broken promises, the hurt, the hunger to prove something. No, I said finally. Because back then I was trying to build a future with someone who didn't believe in me. And now, I've built one with someone who does. Her brows furrowed slightly. Someone. I smiled politely. You'll meet her someday. Her face went still, and for a second I saw the flicker of something in her eyes, realization, maybe even jealousy. Then she nodded quietly, whispered, Goodbye, Michael, and walked away. After she left, I stood by the window for a long time watching the city move below. People rushing, cars honking, lights flickering, everyone chasing something just like I once did. Except now I wasn't chasing anymore. I had arrived. But even as I told myself that, a part of me couldn't shake what I'd seen in her eyes before she walked out, that faint trace of regret. Not just for what she'd said years ago, but for realizing she'd left too soon. I wasn't angry, not even proud. I just felt closure. The kind that doesn't come from revenge or apologies, the kind that comes when you see life complete the circle on its own. That night as I locked the office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry if I crossed any lines today. It was just strange seeing you after so long. I'm really proud of you. Emma." I read it twice, then typed a simple reply. "Thank you, Emma. Take care." No bitterness. No unfinished business. Just an ending, quiet and clean. But life wasn't done surprising me yet. A few weeks later, my assistant walked in looking a little hesitant. "Michael, there's something you should see," she said, handing me her tablet. It was a news article. "Hendrix Media faces acquisition talks after financial losses." I read it again to be sure. The same company that had once laughed at me, the same place Emma had gone to build her future, was now on the verge of being sold. And the buyer's proposal, waiting for final approval, was mine. My company had grown fast, faster than anyone expected. QuickLink was now expanding into creative management, and Hendrix Media was one of our targets. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the headline. My heart didn't race. There was no excitement, no shock. Just one quiet thought. So this is how karma works. Not loud, not cruel, just poetic. And for the first time in years, I whispered to myself, "It's time." The following week, I sat in a boardroom much larger than the one I started in years ago. Polished wood, panoramic glass windows, and a dozen people in suits waiting for me to speak. On the agenda, Hendrix Media acquisition. As the presentation began, my legal team discussed valuations, terms, and strategies. I barely spoke, my eyes fixed on the company name glowing on the projector screen. Hendrix Media. A name that once represented a world far above mine. Now, it was just another opportunity. When the meeting ended, my CFO turned to me. "They've accepted the preliminary offer, Michael. We'll finalize the transition within the next month." I nodded slowly. "Schedule a follow-up meeting with their management next week. I'll attend personally." He smiled. "Of course." That night, I couldn't help thinking about Emma again. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was irony. The same company she once saw as her escape from my failures was now about to be signed under my name. The next week came quickly. I arrived at Hendrix Media's headquarters, the same glass building she used to dream of working in. As I stepped into the conference room, I could feel the tension in the air. The executives were polite but uneasy. And then the door opened. Emma walked in. Our eyes met. She froze mid-step, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't breathe for a second. "You're the buyer?" she asked softly. I gave a calm, professional smile. "That's right. QuickLink is expanding. We see potential here." Her colleagues exchanged awkward glances, pretending to focus on their laptops. I could feel her heartbeat from across the room, not because of me but because of what life had just done. Throughout the meeting she barely spoke. I did all the talking, guiding the discussion like I'd done it 1,000 times. I wasn't cruel, I wasn't smug, I was just in control. When the meeting ended, I shook hands with the executives and said, "We'll make this transition smooth. You've all built something valuable." Then as everyone filed out, she stayed behind, again. "Michael," she said quietly, "is this your revenge?" I looked at her for a long moment and said, "No, Emma. This is just business." She stood there, her eyes glistening, searching for something in my expression. Anger, satisfaction, maybe even forgiveness. But all she found was calm. The kind of calm that comes when you've already made peace with the past. "Just business," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "You really changed." "I had to," I said quietly. "You told me I'd never be rich. I guess I had to prove you wrong, not to you but to myself." She gave a small shaky laugh. "I remember saying that. I was cruel." "No," I said, shaking my head slightly. "You were honest. Maybe harsh but honest. You showed me what I needed to see." She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know I'd regret it someday." For the first time I felt a flicker of sympathy, not for what she did but for the weight she'd carried since. Regret is its own kind of punishment. "I don't want you to regret anything," I said. "We both did what we thought was right back then. It just led us here." Her eyes met mine again. So what happens now? I smiled faintly. Now, you'll probably still see me around. Just not as the man you once knew. She hesitated. Do you still think about us? I took a breath. I think about who we were. But that's not who we are anymore. She nodded, tears threatening to break. I always knew you'd do something great. I just didn't expect to be standing on the other side of it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the city below filled the silence. Car horns, wind, and the faint hum of a life still moving forward. I finally said, Emma, I don't hate you. I never did. You were just the reason I became me. She looked at me, her expression soft but sad. Then I guess I should say you're welcome. I smiled lightly. You should. As she turned to leave, I knew this was the real ending. Not revenge. Not regret. Just closure. And as the door closed behind her, I whispered, Goodbye, Emma. But deep down, I knew the past had finally let me go too. A few weeks later, the acquisition was finalized. Hendrix Media officially became part of Quicklink. I signed the final documents in my office, surrounded by my legal and finance teams. The moment should have felt monumental, the kind of moment you dream about when you're at your lowest. But instead it felt quiet, peaceful. No victory rush. No thrill of revenge. Just closure, clean and complete. After everyone left, I stayed in the office alone, watching the city lights from my window. It hit me how strange life is, how it circles back, how it tests you, how it humbles you right when you think you're done learning. I thought about that night years ago when I sat on the floor after she left. I remembered the sound of the door closing, the silence that followed, and the version of me who thought it was the end of everything. If only he knew, it was the beginning. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. My assistant peeked in. Michael, someone's here to see you. Who? I asked. She didn't give a name. Said you'd know her. Before I could reply, Emma stepped in. She looked different, calm, reflective. Not the same confident woman who once walked out on me. Not the nervous one who had faced me during the acquisition. This time she looked human. I'm not here to talk about the company, she said quickly. I just wanted to say thank you for how you handled everything. You could have embarrassed me or made things hard, but you didn't. I smiled faintly. I told you, Emma. It wasn't about revenge. She nodded. I know. And that's what makes it harder to walk away. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then she said softly, You became the man I always knew you could be. I just wish I hadn't stopped believing before you did. I looked at her, no anger, no sadness, just peace. Maybe that's how it had to happen. She smiled faintly, nodded once, and walked away for the last time. This time I didn't watch her go. I just turned toward the window, toward everything ahead. Weeks turned into months and the noise around the acquisition faded. Life went back to its rhythm. Meetings, travel, late-night brainstorming sessions. But something inside me had shifted. I was no longer chasing validation. I was building with purpose. Quicklink grew faster than ever. We opened new offices, hired more people, and expanded into markets I used to only read about. My name started appearing in magazines and podcasts. The founder who built success out of rejection. Every time I saw it, I smiled, not because I wanted the world to notice me, but because I knew how hard it had been to get here. One evening, after a long day, I found myself driving through the old neighborhood where Emma and I used to live. The streets hadn't changed much. Same little cafes, same cracked sidewalks, same cheap apartments. For a moment, it felt like time hadn't moved at all. I parked near the corner where we used to sit and talk about dreams. I remembered her voice, the excitement in her tone when we talked about the future, before life got complicated, before disappointment took over. It wasn't bitterness that filled me, it was gratitude. Gratitude for what had happened, and for how it forced me to become someone I didn't even know I could be. As I sat there, an elderly shop owner recognized me. Aren't you that young man who used to come here all the time? He asked, smiling. With that girl? I nodded, laughing softly. Yeah, that was me. He smiled. You two looked happy. We were, I said. For a while. He patted my shoulder. Whatever happened, son, you turned out fine. You've got that look, the one people get when they've made peace with the past. I thanked him, got back in my car, and drove away. The city lights shimmered through my windshield, and I realized he was right. I wasn't haunted anymore. I was healed. Because sometimes, peace isn't found in the person who hurt you, it's found in the person you become after they leave. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a business conference. A large one this time. Thousands of people, cameras, reporters. The theme was turning setbacks into success. I almost laughed when I saw the invitation. If only they knew how literal that was for me. Standing backstage, I thought about how far I'd come from the boy who once coded on a borrowed laptop in a shared office, trying to prove he was worth something. Now, I was about to share that journey with the world. When my name was announced, the applause hit like a wave. I walked up to the stage, adjusted the mic, and looked at the crowd. And for a moment, I didn't see strangers. I saw every failure, every long night, every no that brought me here. I started simply. 3 years ago, someone I loved told me I'd never be rich. At the time, I believed her. Because I was broke, lost, and barely hanging on. But life has a funny way of turning pain into power, if you let it. The room went silent. I continued sharing my story, not as revenge but as a lesson. How sometimes the words that break you are the same ones that build you. How failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the road to it. By the time I finished, people were on their feet. Cameras flashed, hands clapped, and in that moment I didn't think of money or fame. I thought of peace. After the event, as I walked out, a woman approached me. She was smiling. "Your story moved me," she said. "It reminded me not to give up on someone I love." I smiled back. Then it was worth telling. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room, looking out over the city skyline. I realized I hadn't thought about Emma in weeks. Not out of ignorance, but because she no longer lived in my mind. I had finally outgrown the pain that built me. And for the first time in years, I whispered to myself, "You made it." The night after the conference, I couldn't sleep. Not because of excitement or nerves, but because my mind was finally quiet. The kind of quiet that comes only when every unanswered question has been resolved, every wound has healed, and every version of yourself that once screamed for validation has been heard. I walked out to the balcony, the city glowing beneath me like a sea of stars. The air was cold, but it felt good, sharp, alive, real. I thought about the boy I once was, sitting on the floor of that dim apartment, broken after hearing the words, "You'll never be rich." He didn't know it then, but those words weren't a curse. They were the beginning of everything. Sometimes it takes losing everything, love, pride, comfort, to finally meet the person you were meant to become. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos. One of them caught my eye, a picture of Emma and me taken years ago at a cafe, laughing over coffee we could barely afford. I stared at it for a moment, then smiled. Not with pain. With gratitude. Because without her doubt, I might never have found my drive. Without her leaving, I might never have learned to stand on my own. I closed the photo, locked my phone, and whispered, "Thank you. Not for the love. Not for the hurt. But for the lesson." As dawn started to break, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down by the window. The sun rose over the skyline, painting everything gold, like the world itself was starting over. That's when it hit me, success wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about becoming someone right for yourself. I had everything I once dreamed of. The company, the respect, the peace. But the real victory wasn't in wealth or power. It was in knowing I'd risen, not for her, not for the world, but for me. And as the first light touched my face, I smiled. Because the truth was simple, she was wrong. But without her, I might never have been right.